Ladies and gentlemen, just last month we saw the region of South Sudan announce itself a new country by way of referendum. We say this is something which shows us that it is tapping into its right to be a separate nation and a separate group from the previous nation of Sudan. We say this exists in many places across the world where discourse is taking place between regions and the countries in which they exist, such as Scotland within Great Britain and such as the Basque region within Spain. We say that all of these regions have the right themselves in which to secede from those countries, and we say this is the framework with which we want to set up this debate. We want to set up a place where these countries can have their grievances aired, be in a place in which they can secede for the betterment of themselves, but also for the country in which they're leaving, and that's why we propose this motion under three main arguments. Firstly, we're going to talk about why arbitrary lines do not define a nation. Secondly, we are going to talk about the necessity for a full national autonomy. The third point that Team Ireland wishes to discuss is why this proposition will solve conflicts throughout the world. Our first, no thank you. Our first point will be dealt with. Our first and second points will be dealt with myself. The arbitrary lines do not define a nation, and the second point, the necessity for full national autonomy. So how are we going to go about doing this? We say that there are certain criteria set out in the Montevideo Convention on nationhood, and we say that those are the criteria we're going to be looking at when we say what regions can and can't decide whether or not they can secede. No, thank you. We say those criteria are, firstly, the issue of permanent population. Was that population there and has been there for a significant amount of time in order to claim that land? Secondly, the ability of which that new country will be able to interact with others. Can it sustain international relations? Can it deal with countries in the way that all other normal countries do? The third idea is the issue of governability. Will those people respect that government, have the desire to be there? We say they do because of this motion, which requires a referendum. And the final issue of economic viability. Do they have enough within themselves to sustain? No thank you. And can they act as alone within nations? We said this will all be done under the idea that these regions will have a referendum, and if they receive a majority vote within that referendum to remove themselves from that previous nation, we say that they should have the right to do so. So the first point that Team Ireland wants to discuss, why arbitrary lines do not define a nation. We said that borders are arbitrary lines in the sand, which were drawn in times of post-conflict, in times of post-colonialism. I'll take you in a second. We said that these things happen because people who were leaving essentially didn't care what they did. They drew lines in certain ways which were handy for them. They said they didn't care about what they were leaving behind them, and they just drew them because they looked nice on the map. Go ahead.
If Tibet seceded from China, the first thing China would do would be invade a newly independent country. Unilateral secession only causes more conflict.
No, we say, and we'll be dealing this way more in our second speech, we say that this escalates the level of democratic relations between these countries. We say that it is far more of a step for a country to invade another nation, whereas when they are just neighbours within the same region, we say it's not as big a deal for someone to go down to the neighbourhood and set fire to all of those houses. We said it is far different, no thank you, when we say that they actually have to invade another country, disrespect entirely the autonomy of that country, and actually make that an entirely escalated situation. We don't think that's going to happen, as you've just asserted. Also, we say that people feel a separate cultural and social identity from these countries in which they are. So we say if you ask a Basque and tell him he's Spanish, he will reply angrily and tell you that he is most certainly a Basque person, separate and completely autonomous from the nation of Spain. And we say this shows that the legitimacy of a country comes from within its cultural and social identity within that country, and what people actually believe is part of that country. We said that legitimacy is lost when people express through a referendum that they do not wish to be part of that country. Because we said that democracy is all about engagement within the nation. We said that democracy is something which people have to engage with, no thank you, in order for that nation to succeed and to be viable. We said that is something which is lost when people show you that they don't want to be part of that nation. We said that voting, no thank you, is something which is a civic duty, and we said that is something which contributes to that society. If people no longer want to contribute to that society, they damage that society by being part of it, and as such they should have the right to succeed, both for the benefit of themselves and for that nation, because they create two separate entities which are both clearly what they want to be and can decide on the policies they want to be, and that is for the betterment of both parties. We said when all those things, no thank you, are combined with the criteria that we set out for these regions, such as permanent population, we said that decides who can and can't do what in certain situations. We said that people who have a permanent population, have governability, can interact with others and have economic viability should be able to succeed because they can actually change the way they go about doing business. We say that they are, when they are lumped in as part of that bigger nation, we said that those ideas are lost within representation. because they will only have a certain amount of MPs within Parliament. No, thank you. We said that all of that is lost when you create two separate entities within countries. We said that those ideas actually come out in the way that they are intended, and as such they should have the right to do so. We also say that countries themselves have a large degree of control over who controls what in terms of personal liberty. We said that within social and ethnic groups there are massive differences over who could be able to do what when it comes to the idea of personal autonomy and liberty within society to do certain things. We said that is damaged when everyone is lumped under one big heading. No, thank you. We said that individual countries decide that for themselves, and that's why it is very important that different groups have different ideas, not only as a country so that they can act with autonomy, but also as individuals so that they can act within reason what they have set as their societal norms, and why that's different when they're lumped in under one big group. We said that's different because all of those ideas are lost within that group. No, thank you. The second point that Team Ireland wishes to discuss is the necessity for full autonomy. So we established the right that these countries and regions have to secede and to be separate. We said those things are very important. But in terms of a practical level, what do these countries want to contribute to themselves? We say that all of these countries and regions want to be part of the international stage. I'll take you in a second. We say that all of these countries want to do certain things, have an impact on social, political and economic policy around the globe. And we said that voice is lost when they are just put in under the heading of a country that they don't want to be under.
The sovereignty of a state is dependent on its ability to protect its people. Unilaterally seceded states cannot do so and should not exist.
And we've already said in our criteria under the Montevideo Convention that these countries will have to be able to govern their own people, have viability within that situation, and essentially be in a situation to protect its people because they have a sustainable industry. If we look at the Basque region, they have a massive fishing industry that is easily enough to sustain the economy of a very small region like the Basque Nation. We said that's something which means it can protect the rights of the people and can protect the interests of its people. We also say when it comes to policy like this, devolution is in no way enough, because we say devolution is something which doesn't give full autonomy, it only gives you the hope of full autonomy. We said that's not enough in this situation. We said that people have to be able to decide what it is they want to do. We said that these people have decided they want to leave. They want different decisions to be made. We say when they are part of that overriding group of the big nation itself, we said that those ideas are lost in translation essentially. They don't have proper representation of the ideas they want out there for themselves. So for example, if there is a movement within Scotland to join the Euro, they can't do so because Britain has decided for themselves, and is in the interest of the larger group, not to join the European, the Euro group. We said that is something which countries themselves, because it has such a massive impact for that region itself, it's something which countries should be able to decide for themselves and not just be lumped under something which people have decided arbitrarily a long time ago. We also say that in terms of identity, these two separate groups now have fully legitimate decisions, because each individual, we can be sure, has decided themselves what it is that we want within that group. We say that one region has decided they want to do X, another region has decided they want to do Y, and that's why we stand in proposition. Thank you. International stage, and why they want to engage with people on an international stage. And we say that ideas become confused when you lump two separate people into one country and say, there you go, you have your policies there. We say that these people want separate policies, and those policies get confused when you have a misrepresentation of what they actually want and confusion of representation. The third and final point that Team Ireland brought you was the practical issue of conflict, and why, when you elevate this to a level of diplomacy, you are dealing with a far grander scale, and as such the consequences are far grander, so that England will not invade Scotland. We said that something like that is very important, because you create people who were previously waving guns at each other to people who are now talking over a desk, as something which Team Ireland in its past and the country of Ireland has dealt with very successfully when removing itself from British rule. So as a broader context, Team Ireland has dealt with the broad issues of this debate, not just the principle, but the practical, and that's why we stand to propose.
Ladies and gentlemen, the judges will now complete their mark sheets and then retire from the room to discuss the debate. The judges will then return